The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 215 of the Pesky Report. I'm Ed Hand. Today, I'm joined by Kris Willis of Battery Power. It's a Braves website. How are you doing today, Kris?
Hey, I'm doing good.
And Kris is coming on to give us a little bit of a preseason sneak peek of the Braves. This is the second of our series. We had the Marlins yesterday, so staying in the NL East. That was more of a coincidence than a design. But hey, with any luck, maybe we'll get the Mets or the Phillies next. Yeah, how are you doing today, Kris?
I'm doing good. Enjoying some of this spring training baseball, getting ready for a full afternoon, I hope. But yeah, it's going good. It's good to have baseball back.
Yeah, seriously. And tell me a little bit about yourself. What's Battery Power, and how did you get involved with it?
Battery Power is the Atlanta Braves site for SB Nation, and I've been writing at SB Nation since 2010. I really started out in basketball, but I moved over to the Braves site in 2015, and I went full time in May of 2021. So I do this for a living now. And it's a lot of fun, and I love the Braves, and obviously love SB Nation too.
Yeah, did you go to journalism school?
No, I did not. I'm what you would call an amateur blogger, I guess. It was just I worked a real job and did this on the side for a long time, and it was it was a fun hobby that eventually paid off. So I'm really thankful.
What were you doing before this?
I worked at a recreation center, run the programs. So, I've been around sports my whole life, baseball, basketball, and, helped organize the sports leagues and, scheduled things, found umpires, found coaches, the whole 9 yards. And then I would come home at night and put on this other hat and, and handle sports stuff.
Now, did you grow up a Braves fan?
Yes, I live in Georgia. I've been an Atlanta sports fan pretty much most of my life. Follow all the local teams, but yeah, I grew up the Braves. One of the first memories I have of professional sports was with the Braves and watching those old TBS days back then. So.
Yeah, I have some vivid memories of the Braves for that exact reason with TBS. It was always nice because if the Red Sox weren't playing, you could just go to TBS. They'd be on. The Cubs were kind of similar because they had the WGN team. So if you had basic cable, you had access to a few teams that you might not normally see. But what was the first Braves team that you really remember?
I really started following. The first one I remember was in '82 when they started 13-0, and I was young. But I can remember that, and I don't remember watching too many games. Obviously, I didn't get to stay up too late. But I really got into baseball around '86, and I'd say from then on, I pretty much watched whenever I had the opportunity. And the Braves were tough to watch back then, but they were on all the time. And and I think, going through those years is what made those 90s teams so special because, for a long time, you're like, this can't, we'll never see a real good team here. And then, all of a sudden we didn't know anything but winning through that run with all those Hall of Famers. And, so it was a pretty sweet transition to get to see both sides of it.
Of the big three starters of that period, Greg Maddux, Tommy Glavine, and John Smoltz, which one was your favorite?
Maddux is still probably my favorite. I know, he wasn't the homegrown guy, but, to me, there was a period of time there where he was just absolutely the best in baseball and did it with, not overpowering stuff. Just was unreal to watch. And, I think back to that time, and I don't know if I appreciated it honestly as much as I should have, just because you had so many Hall of Famers there. And, and then, but I mean, you can't, John Smoltz, Tom Glavine. I mean, they've, it's unreal to have three pitchers of that caliber on the same team.
Yeah, like any day at the ballpark, you could see something special there. Tommy Glavine,
Yep.
I think, is someone that holds some sentimentality for me because he's from Billerica, Massachusetts, which is like 2 towns away from where I grew up. I think his brother's the coach of, at least he used to be the coach of the Northeastern team. So, they're still somewhat involved in the scene here. But it's funny that you mentioned it with not appreciating Greg Maddux, because when I was growing up, I think my first team was 1998 with the Red Sox, and Pedro Martinez was really starting to kind of dominate the scene around here. And I don't think I appreciated Pedro like that. Every time you saw Pedro pitch, it was an experience. The closest we've had since his, when Chris Sale was healthy and in 2017, 2018. But something like that's pretty special. I imagine the Mets had that with DeGrom and I guess now Scherzer and Verlander. But it's special when you get to see guys like that on the regular. But I'm going to ask you about the one Red Sox player that's coming over from the Braves this year before we go into anything purely Braves related. And what is your scouting report on Adam Duvall?
Man, Adam's been real fun to watch. Unfortunately got off to a slow start last year and but was coming alive right when that wrist injury happened. And I think the Braves never really kind of recovered. I think they really could have used him down the stretch. You go back to 2021, that magical run at the end of the season, a lot of people overlook, but Adam Duvall played a huge part in that after the Braves reacquired him from the Marlins, and he played center field. And that was just kind of a throw in there when that happened. We're like, oh, well, I don't know how this is going to work out. But not only did he play center field, he did it at a pretty high level. And, it's just a test. You don't see guys move out of the corners to center at that stage of a career very often. So it's just a testament to his hard work. He's kind of streaky at the plate. I mean, 2020, he had one of the most miraculous 2-week runs. I think there was a 3-homer game actually against the Red Sox mixed in there, but he was just scorching hot, and that's what I've kind of seen out of him. He can kind of just be floating along and then just all of a sudden carry a team for a couple of weeks. But I think the defensively, even last year when he wasn't hitting to start the season, the Braves outfield was a mess. Cunha was hurt. Michael Harris wasn't in the majors yet. And Duvall was kind of the glue defensively. I mean, he was having to cover way more than he probably should have been asked to, and did a good job, showed up every day, to work. So I hated to see his season end last year with that wrist injury. And then I really kind of thought that the Braves might bring him back. Honestly, it was one of those things we were kind of waiting to see. But it was good to see him get an opportunity in Boston, because I'm sure he's going to play a big part there.
Yeah, the center field, that's good to know that he was able to handle center field, because that's the question I think a lot of people have about him here in Boston, because what basically happened was Trevor Story got hurt at second base. Right. They had to move Kike Hernandez into the infield, so Duvall's coming in to play center. And the question is, can he handle it? He's been a corner outfielder his whole life, so that's reassuring to hear that he was able to do a pretty good job with it in Atlanta.
Yeah, the metrics, really backed it up too. I mean, he's not flashy out there or anything, but if you need somebody to play it, I think he really showed that. And like I said, they tried a lot of things, in that run to the World Series, but once they settled on Duvall and center, everything else just kind of fell in place. So, I'm pretty confident in him. If he's hitting well, that he can handle one of those spots for you guys.
From the 2021 perspective with you guys, was that World Series, looking back at it, was that a surprise?
Oh yeah, because I mean, there's no way to put I compare it a little bit to what we saw with the Phillies last year, who just got, I mean, there was right there at the end of the season, I think 2 weeks before the regular season, it looked like they may miss the playoffs entirely. The Braves were under 500 virtually until the beginning of August, and Ronald Acuna Jr. tears his knee up, heading into the All-Star break. Ian Anderson comes down with a shoulder injury. I mean, it looked bleak. I mean, we were wondering if they might consider selling some pieces off. And of course they didn't do that. They went out and got Jock Peterson basically rebuilt their whole outfield with Jorge Soler and Duvall, who came in and played a big part, and just got on this unbelievable run, and was able to just keep playing and carried that right through, in the postseason. But yeah, you can't be under 500 for that long. And they just kept hanging around, but they couldn't make up any ground or anything. And then, when it took off, it took off.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. In October, anything could happen. It's just getting into the dances what's important. The Braves definitely showed that last year or 2 years ago.
Right.
How'd the team look last year? What was the 2022 experience for Braves fans?
Well, I mean, you look at the end of the day, they won 101 games, but it kind of started kind of similar to 2021. I mean, they're under 500 at the end of May. And I think the two big things that happen is Michael Harris comes up from Double-A and it goes to center field, which frees Duvall up to go to a corner, and Duvall's bat kind of took off at that point. And then Spencer Strider went into the rotation on a full-time basis. And I mean, it was unreal. I mean, they were 10 and a half games out at that point, and they run the Mets down and obviously won their fifth straight division. I think they hinted at the playoffs. I mean, they really grinded to get that division title, and they entered the playoffs. They really needed that bye from a rest standpoint for their pitching staff and the bullpen. Strider was hurt, but I think it also, I don't want to say it was the reason they lost, but those off days I don't think did them a whole lot of favors either. The Phillies got hot, finished strong, kept right on playing, and the Braves just kind of run into a buzzsaw right there, but like you said, I mean, those division titles, they're important and everybody wants them and everybody wants that bye in the thing. But as the last two seasons have shown, it's who's playing hot, who's playing well at the end, and just getting to the dance gives you a chance. So, I mean, it was a great season for Atlanta. Obviously it just didn't end the way that a whole lot of people were wanting or expecting coming off that World Series win.
Yeah, and there were a lot of changes with the Braves too. It's especially, I mean, I think Freddie Freeman and Matt Olson kind of swapping roles there was kind of one of the bigger ones, at least from a national perspective. How did Olson fit in with the team, especially in comparison to Freeman?
Well, I mean, Olson had a really good season. He, unfortunately, a slump, August, September kind of skewed his final numbers, but it was still a good season. But I mean, it had to be an unbelievably difficult situation for him. I mean, he's coming back home to play, which brings its own set of challenges. Plus, he's replacing a franchise legend. So I'm expecting a big season out of Matt Olson this year, just because he's been here now. He's coming in. It's not going to be, all the hype around Freddie Freeman last year, and deservedly so. Because I mean, Freeman was an important piece of this franchise, and the last memory we'll ever have of Freddie Freeman is him throwing his arms up, after catching that last out in the World Series, and and we'll always remember that. But I thought Olson fit in well, and they locked him up. That trade looked a whole lot better once they locked him up long term, and so he's kind of said he's part of this core going forward. But you're right. I mean, there was a lot of change coming off that World Series win. And, you just hope that, I think they've just been doubling down on this core, trying to keep building it. And, and I think they're in good shape to be competitive for a long time.
Yeah. That young core is really impressive. When you look at how the front office there has managed to lock guys down long term, very young. You look at the deal that Ozzie Albies got, it's an absolute bargain. You look at what Ronald Acuna got, even after blowing his knee out, it's still an absolute bargain. Right. How's that kind of looked from the fan perspective and just from viewing it? Was that a surprise when they started locking these guys down, and now do you kind of just expect them whenever, like with Vaughn Grissom, if he has a good year, you kind of like, well, 7 years for him?
Yeah, I mean, it was like those kind of come out of nowhere, and then the value of them, I think, surprised a lot of people, because I think a lot of people thought Ozzie might have got a deal that Ronald got, and then Ronald would have gotten much more, had he waited. Even though he is coming out, he's as time went on, he's coming off an ACL tear and really wasn't ever himself last year, but. We have come to expect it a little bit now. I mean, they traded for Sean Murphy this offseason, and then it took 2 weeks for them to get him locked up. So we were kind of waiting around like, well, what's going on here? Because the Matt Olson trade happened, and then the next day they announced the extension. So, yeah, it has become rather commonplace. When they make a significant move or something, that you're kind of wondering, well, will they lock this guy up and everything? So, yeah, it has kind of become part of the culture.
Which of those of the sightings from last year was your personal favorite?
Well, I mean, I want to say Michael Harris, just because, I just think I think we haven't seen the best of Michael Harris yet, which is saying something considering he was a 4-win player last year, nearly 5. I think he's as good a defensive center fielder as anybody in baseball. But Spencer Strider, if he's able to do what he did last year, if he's able to carry that through and stay, he's going to put up unbelievable numbers. So, I think getting those two guys locked up, team-friendly deals, they're going to be here for a long time. Not worried about them going to arbitration. You're not worried about, the free agent clock ticking. I think that was big. And, it's, rookie of the year and rookie of the year runner-up. I think, that's pretty surprising, because maybe we could have squinted and thought, well, they'll be able to lock one of those guys up. But to get them both, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, just to take care of that. No stress until like 6 years from now or however long it is.
Right.
But one big change that's going to be coming this year. Last year it was Freddie Freeman. This year it's Dansby Swanson. Is Grisham going to be the shortstop this season?
It sounds like that they really want him to be, and it feels like he's going to get every opportunity. I think we wondered if they would get into a trade or a free agent signing for a veteran shortstop. I didn't really ever think that they were going to go after one of the big three that was out there. I didn't think that really kind of fit their salary structure and their MO really, but wondered if they would bring somebody in. I think the question's always been, I think they're really high on Grisham, but the question's always been throughout the minors was if he's going to be able to stick at shortstop defensively. There's been speculation, he may end up at third. He could end up in left field. He kind of came up last year out of necessity. Ozzie was hurt, and Orlando Arcia was backing him up and got hurt. So, Grisham makes the jump from Double-A. Playing second base, a place he's never really played that much. The bat sparked him. He was a huge part down the stretch. He spent the offseason working with Ron Washington, one-on-one in New Orleans. So, the Braves are confident that he can make the progress at short. And, so far in the spring, it's looked pretty good, but we're going to I think we'll have to see. We need a few more weeks to look at it to see, but I do really think they really want him to be the opening day shortstop. And I think it really helps them if he is able to do that, because that keeps Arcia kind of in a utility role. And he's been pretty good at that the last couple of years.
Would Arcia be the backup plan if he's not ready yet?
Yeah, that's for the way it looks right now. Obviously, as teams pare down rosters, you could see some other names come in the mix. But if Grisham were to, I think the Braves would want Grisham to play every day. So if he doesn't get this opening day job, he's probably going to Gwinnett to play shortstop in hopes of taking the job later on in the season. And I believe it would be Orlando Arcia if that's the case. And then, that would open up that utility spot. They've got a few guys in camp that could compete for that. But I do think Arcia is kind of the backup emergency plan if Grisham falters.
You mentioned Sean Murphy earlier, and that was one thing that I remember. There were rumors that he was getting traded to the Braves, and I looked at the Braves roster and said, why do they need him? They've got Travis d'Arnaud there. They've got Manny Pena as the backup. What do they need Sean Murphy for? Were you surprised when that trade happened?
We were a little surprised because, you had d'Arnaud and then you had William Contreras too, who had 20 home runs last year and spent a lot of time at DH last year, just kind of came out of nowhere. He was kind of the third guy going into camp. Manny Pena gets hurt, and has season-ending wrist surgery. And then Contreras didn't just come in and fill a spot. He hit his way into the lineup in a lot of ways. Yeah. So, it was a little surprising, but I think what you get, and with the rule changes, the Braves really value that catcher position defensively. And that's not a knock on Contreras. Contreras is he made a lot of progress last year, but I don't think he's ever going to be Sean Murphy. I think they value Sean Murphy as one of the best defensive catchers in the game, as far as the controlling the running game and working with the pitching staff. I've heard JT Realmuto's name mentioned in there. I think Realmuto is probably still number one, but I don't think Sean Murphy. I think Sean Murphy's in that group. And then they locked him up. Darno's under contract, I think through next year, and there's a club option or something. So, they were really comfortable adding Murphy to that mix. We may see them both in the lineup at times, one of them DHing. But I think with the rule changes, that was another big part of it. But because Murphy's ability to throw out base stealers and whatnot is going to prove big this year.
Now, we've talked about the infield and catching. What's the left field situation? Because they've got Harris, they've got Acuna. Who's the left fielder?
That's a good question. And I mean, that's if shortstop's the number one storyline, left field's probably just right behind it. Eddie Rosario was World Series hero, but was pretty much a lost season last year. He underwent eye surgery. He's in camp this time, and is going to play in the WBC with Puerto Rico. I think it's his job to lose. But they're calling an open competition. They've brought a lot of guys in. Marcell Ozuna's still here. It's been a troubled 2 seasons for him. Some off the field stuff, but the on the field stuff's not looked real good either. I've seen him mentioned in left field a lot here in the last week or so, and I think a lot of that might be the biggest signal that we may see one of the catchers at DH a lot more than people were originally thinking. Jordan Luplow, they brought him in during the offseason on a 1-year deal. It looks to me like if things go right, you could see some combination of those three in left. Maybe whoever's hitting. I think it'd be the best situation would be Rosario and platooning probably with Luplow at this point. But that is a question mark.
Lefties, so that would make sense.
Yeah, that is a question mark. It seems like they're going to throw a lot of guys at that problem to start with, but that's the one area that I could see them going out before the trade deadline. If it's not working out, then maybe they have to go out looking for a left fielder, to slot in that spot.
Anybody that you think of off the top of your head that would fit that role that could be available?
Man, we went through all kinds of options and this offseason, from Mitch Haniger to, all these people that we thought could go in there. But the fact is there's a lot of money committed to those guys that I just mentioned earlier with Ozuna and Rosario. Rosario is going to make $9 million this year and still got a club option as well. So, it makes sense that they're going to try those guys. I hate speculating on trades because a lot of times we don't even get a rumor with the Braves. They just tweet out the press release and, the deal's done and it's not something that you ever really considered, so they make it really tough to kind of see where they would. But I could see them in the market for an outfielder if the situation in left doesn't work out.
So the rotation for the Braves, I mean, they've got Max Fried, they've got Spencer Strider, as you mentioned. What's the rest of the rotation look like for them?
Well, Kyle Wright came out of nowhere last year. He was pretty big, a pretty big surprise. I mean, we had a good performance in the World Series in 2021, went to spring last year just hoping to land a spot and ended up being one of their better pitchers. He really took a huge step forward. Charlie Morton's back. It was kind of an up and down year for Morton. Gave up a lot of homers last year, but he's still 200 strikeouts. They're hoping that with a full spring and, remember he had the broken leg in the World Series. So he spent that offseason kind of rehabbing, and then the shortened spring, I don't think did him any favors. So they're hoping he's going to come back. And then there's a competition kind of for the 5th spot between Ian Anderson, Michael Soroka, Bryce Elder. They've got a lot of guys right there at that AAA top, at the top of AAA that could slot in there. So I think it's a pretty good competition going into. We're gonna have to see how it plays out through the end of March. But a lot of good options when you've got guys like Soroka, who's coming off a pretty significant injury, and then Anderson, who pitched a lot of key innings, in 20 and 21. So.
Yeah. What happened with Anderson? Because I remember when he came up in 2020, that debut, he was pretty much unhittable. And then, he wasn't bad in 2021. He was a pretty decent pitcher. And last year, it seemed just like kind of the wheels just sort of fell off. What happened, and what's the outlook for him right now?
It's a good question. We don't really know for sure. I know the metrics, there was always some concern about him a little bit because he's been essentially a two-pitch pitcher. He's got a curveball. I know he's been working on a slider, but he essentially was a fastball changeup for those early, when he first came up. He had the shoulder injury in 2021, came back and pitched okay, but I didn't feel like he was ever what we saw in 2020. And then last year, he came to spring. I felt like the shortened spring probably didn't do him any favors either. But he struggled to command that fastball, and that just kind of unhinged everything else, and ended up back up in AAA, and then had an oblique injury at the end. I wonder if he would have figured into the playoff picture had the injury not happened. We'll have no way of knowing that, but it was pretty much a lost season for him. But I know he spent a lot of the offseason trying to correct that stuff. His first start yesterday didn't go well, gave up a couple of homers. So we're just going to have to see with him. I don't know if they've not said anything that there was anything really wrong seriously with that shoulder. It was kind of billed as inflammation, but he's not really looked like the same guy since that All-Star break in 2021. So, we'll just have to see how it plays out with him the rest of the way. But I mean, if they could get him back to anywhere close to that form, then this rotation's really set in a lot of ways.
I mean, the same can be said for Soraka, though, with, it was a bit, people might forget because I think it was 2 years ago when he got hurt, but he was the ace of that staff for a bit, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it looked like he was going to be the number one, and when he got hurt 3 starts into the 2020 season, and that's when Max Fried really, ascended to that number one spot. And, there's a lot of question marks with Soroka. He did get back to the mound last year, which was good, pitched some in AAA, and was hoping to had a normal offseason. But he's been bothered a little bit by a hamstring in the early part of camp. He still isn't throwing off the mound. Braves obviously are not going to take any chances with him with how many injuries he's had over the last few years. So, if he's not on a mound soon, I'm going to guess that he's probably going to begin the season in AAA. But there's another guy that's kind of a lottery ticket. If he can get himself right physically again, then that's a potential another really good starter.
Then there's the third one you mentioned, Elder, who
Bryce Elder
is a little less proven than the other two that came out last year. But what's his deal?
He he made a debut last year. It was a little surprising. Early on, struggled, walked a lot of guys, elevated walk rate, went to AAA, and then came back up at the end of the season and pitched well. His first spring start didn't go well either, but it's so early in the camp, you don't want to read too much into those early performances. But, I don't think he's got the upside of Anderson or Soroka at this point. But, he's a guy that if they need somebody to make a start, they can call on him. He's proven that they can call on him, and he can eat some innings, if they really need to. So
something that I've noticed with the Braves is that they bring up players pretty young. How have they because I look at, some teams, they kind of, okay, this guy is just going to do one full year at AA regardless, one full year at high A. How do they manage to get these guys up through the system so quickly? Because I remember, just off the top of my head, Bryce Wilson would make his debut when he was 20. And that's just, he's not even with the club anymore, but you don't see that many starters making their major league debut with other teams, before they can legally drink.
Yeah, it's, of course, somebody like Acuna, he just hit his way. He just hit his way there. But I think Harris was a little bit surprising for me, personally, last year. I got a lot of questions. He'd impressed in the spring for 2 years, but he was so young and hadn't played at that point, hadn't played above A ball. I thought he would spend the whole season at AA last year, but I think they finally decided that, they needed his defense, if anything. And if he didn't, if he just hit enough to keep his head above water, they were going to hit him ninth and let him play Gold Glove caliber defense in center. But obviously, he came up there and seized the opportunity, made a couple of adjustments, and just really took off offensively. I mean, he was there was a stretch there. He was probably their most productive hitter, in the second half last season. So, I don't really have a good answer for it, except that I know they believe, the farm system rankings will show the Braves at the bottom, but they feel like they believe they're better than that. So I think as the team's transferred from a rebuild into a team that they think can contend year in, year out, we've seen them be more aggressive with young guys and, bringing them up. And, I mentioned Kyle Wright, though. I think it's very player by player specific, because they yo-yoed Kyle Wright for the early part of his career, and then in 2021 just pretty much left him at AAA. He made one bad start early in that season and went to AAA and stayed there and stayed in the rotation all the way until the World Series when they needed him, and he came in and pitched. And I think all that yanking him around kind of hurt his development a little bit. And, he's talked about being able to settle in and make adjustments and was prepared for the next step. So I think it's still really just a player by player thing, but we have seen them, as they've become a contender, be aggressive if they need it, and you don't have to look any further than Vaughn Grissom or Michael Harris last year.
There was another pretty famous Atlanta center fielder in Andrew Jones. Do you get flashed? I'm not going to say Michael Harris is already Andrew Jones, but do you see defensively some Andrew Jones in him?
Yeah. I mean, you see it in there. I mean, to me, Andrew Jones might be the best defensive player, period, that ever played the game. I was lucky. That was another one of those guys that, I watched every day, and I feel like I kind of took it for granted a little bit. I didn't realize what I was watching, but I do think Harris is, in that going to be in that conversation. I think he's that good defensively. I mean, I don't think anybody's Andrew now, but Harris might very well be the best defensive center fielder the Braves have had since Andrew was out there.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you mean with not appreciating it at the time with Jackie Bradley Jr. and Mookie Betts here in Boston. I mean, that, it's you see them 162 or 150 games a year, however much they're playing, and you get so used to it that you see somebody else who's just like a league average defender out there. You're like, wait, why didn't he catch that?
Right.
Yeah, no, guys like that are pretty special. Have you become a little bit of an A's fan by osmosis just for them trading for like half of the Braves minor leaguers?
It's funny. When I was growing up, I told you I watched the Braves religiously because they were on, but the Braves weren't really good in those late 80s, so I kind of gravitated to Oakland then a little bit because the Mark McGuire, Jose Canseco, Ricky Henderson, Dave Stewart, I was kind of a fan of those teams back then. And then, I've always Tim Hudson, that group. So I've always kind of kept an eye on the A's a little bit. I always enjoyed watching them. Didn't get to watch them much. Back then you couldn't just dial it up on MLB.TV and watch it, but it is funny when you kind of look at one of their spring lineups and you're like, hey, look at all these guys that are there, that were in Atlanta just a couple of years ago or in the system a couple of years ago. So yeah, it is kind of neat.
So we've covered almost everything now, but how's the bullpen? Who's the closer going to be with Kenley Jansen leaving in free agency?
I think it's going to be they traded for Raisel Iglesias at the deadline last year from the Angels, and I mean he was lights out when he got to Atlanta. He worked in pretty much a setup role, but he didn't allow but one earned run the rest of the way for the last season, and so I think it's going to be his job to lose. AJ Minter, I think AJ Minter had probably one of the best relief seasons of any reliever last year. But he didn't get the save, so nobody really noticed it that much. But, I think if Iglesias struggles, then we might see Minter finally get that closer chance or something. The back end of the bullpen looks pretty good. Not enough people talked about Colin McHugh last year. I thought that was one of the most unsung signings of the year, just because he can go out and throw one inning in the 8th, or he can come in the 5th and give you 3 innings if you need it. So all the Braves bullpen's been pretty strong, I guess, dating back to 2020. There's some new faces down there, but they're pretty, they've got a lot of options, and I know they're pretty confident in it.
What do Red Sox fans have to look forward to in Kenley Jansen?
Kenley, man, he had how closers are. I mean, you guys dealt with it with
not last
with
year.
Well,
year.
He had one rough stretch last year, and it was hard to watch for a little bit. But for the guy to go out there, and just compete, be able to do that night in, night out, as long as he has. I am interested to see how he adjusted the pitch clock. I think that is the one major question I would have had Kenley came back to Atlanta this year, because he was very deliberate, especially with runners on base. So that's going to be something I think you guys need to watch early on. But he was more so, like I said, other than one stretch. And if only the best closers are not going to have that part of the season where they have a hiccup here or there. He was really fun to watch in Atlanta, honestly. So, I'll be pulling for him, and everything. But that pitch clock thing is the only thing that would give me a little pause on him.
Yeah. Because we had that Braves Red Sox game that ended in a tie to start spring training. Last week. How have you found the pitch clock to be so far?
I'll be honest. I mean, I didn't expect to like it too much, but I watched that game and then watched the rest of the games that I've watched in there. I've kind of grown to it. Now, I do think, it's important for everybody to get on the same page. Obviously, you don't want games ending the way that one did, in the regular season. I think that's much bigger story. But I also think once the players kind of get the rules and what they've got to do under their, understand them better, that we're not going to see it as much. So I'm kind of optimistic about the play clock at this point, just because I like the pace. I think it's a little quicker pace. And, I think once the players get used to it, then, maybe it'll fade a little bit to the background, and it won't be quite as prominent as it is now because it's new.
Yeah, I do data streaming for the Red Sox AAA team, and they did the pitch clock all last year. I didn't actually notice it until someone pointed it out in June to me. And I was like, I just thought there are less commercials here. So
right.
It's faster in between innings, but games would generally be a little bit shorter than MLB games. But I think once they really get used to it, like you said, it's probably not even going to be something that we notice. That's kind of my segue into how does the minor league system right now, when you look at, what prospects are kind of on the horizon for the Braves?
Well, the minor league system's been hit pretty hard, obviously, because Michael Harris and Spencer Strider are in the majors. They've traded between Matt Olson and Sean Murphy. I think they've sent 8 guys that would have probably been in their top 25, out in deals to fill holes on the major league roster. So, but there's still some intriguing guys. Jared Schuster's #1 pick in 2020. He's at AAA. They've got a couple other guys, and Dylan Dodd, who appeared in that Red Sox game, looked pretty good. He should be at AAA. Darius Vines, I think he also pitched in that game, or I know he did over the weekend. There's some more starter depth there. Then you kind of got to go to the low minors. I thought they had a really strong draft last year with Owen Murphy. And then I think from the 2021 draft, AJ Smith-Shawver is kind of one of their top prospects now. But they're still a little ways away. And, if you remember, too, the Braves were shut out of international signings because of the sanctions against the former GM. So, there is a little bit of a gap there. But I think, I think they've got some guys that could get some top 100 buzz maybe at midseason. And then, with a strong draft again, things will start to look a little bit better. But I think this is also, when you lock up all these young players, the minor league system being weak doesn't hurt you quite as bad because your core is not your core's young to begin with. Like I said, I think they've said many times they don't believe, they don't look at the rankings the same way we do. They've got their own internal rankings and they think they're better. No, for example, nobody really, Harris and Strider weren't both top 100 prospects last year, and Von Grissom certainly wasn't, and all three ended up making an impact on that club last year. So, there'll be some surprises along the way, but it is going to be important that they kind of replenish some of that depth down there, just so when injury strikes or something happens, they've got somebody to fall back on, or they've got people to keep making these trades with to use as trade capital to keep supplementing the major league team.
Yeah, it certainly seems like they have the degree of pitching to do that with. At least every team needs pitching, except I just can't believe how many options they have there. It's pretty awesome to think about. You could lose your two back end guys and have two guys right there to take their place. Are there any Braves players that are going to be in the World Baseball Classic this year?
Yeah, the biggest one's going to be Acuna. He'll be playing Venezuela, and then, like I said, Eddie Rosario is playing Puerto Rico. Those are the two big names. They've got some other guys that are a little further back. I don't think they've got anybody on Team USA, and none of the key major league pitchers are going, to my knowledge. But it'll be fun watching Acuna with Venezuela, because I know that's going to be insane. And then I think a lot of us are really interested to see what Eddie Rosario looks like. So we'll be paying attention, just because he could play if he came back and was just a league average bat again, that's really going to lift. That's going to solve one of the big question marks that you've got on the roster right now.
As a division rival, how do you look at the spending that the Mets are doing? Do you feel that the Braves are going to be able to compete with that?
Well, you've got to be smart. I think it's great for the game. I wish you'd see more teams spending the way the Mets and the Padres have, because I think that's the point. That's the point of all this. The Braves are going to be, if they're not in the tax, they're right below it, which is the highest payroll they've ever had. I don't expect them to go up to what the Mets have done. But to compete with teams like that, and the Phillies giving Trey Turner $300 million, obviously, you got to be smart. And, there's a chance that one of these long-term deals that they've handed out, Atlanta, might not work out, in the long run. But I think that's why you've got to be really smart in your evaluations and make those moves, because it's going to be hard. New York can afford to make a couple of mistakes. They can just keep spending, and fill that spot. And every team can't do that right now, or say they can't do that right now. So, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think the NL East is going to be one of the most interesting divisions in baseball, just because you've got the Mets, and then, like I said, the Phillies. Everybody forgets about the Phillies, and they made the run to the World Series last year. They were the last NL East team standing at the end of the day. So, and they'll get and they'll get Bryce Harper back at midseason too. So, you can't discount them either. So I think it's going to be a really interesting division to watch. But any of those three teams, it doesn't matter if they win it, if they're a wild card, any of those three teams could get hot and win the whole thing in October.
Yeah, and even the Nationals are kind of still in rebuild, and the Marlins don't have any hitting, but they do have that rotation. They've got the Cy Young winner. They've got a bunch of young guys there.
Yeah, I feel like the Marlins are probably going to take a step forward here soon, but the problem is they're just in this. They could be a lot better next year, and their record not show it that much, just because they're in a division with, three heavyweights at this point. But, I think they could be, we could look back at this at the end of the season. The Marlins may be the team that decides who wins the division, because they just, with that pitching staff, and anytime you have to go up against Sandy, it could be a problem. So, it's going to be really interesting. Like you said, the Nationals are rebuilding, but, I think Miami's getting better. I don't know if they can really challenge for a playoff spot yet, but, I think they're getting better. You can't just dismiss them anymore.
Now, I'm not going to ask you for a prediction for the record for the Braves or anything like that, but I do want to ask you if you had to pick one player that could be a surprise this year, maybe not to the extent of like a Michael Harris, but somebody that's kind of flying under the radar right now who could have a really good season, who do you think that would be on the Braves?
I think it's going to be Sean Murphy. And the reason I say that, I'll give you a little backstory here. I mean, the catcher position was such a strength last year that a lot of Braves fans were like, why are we making this trade? Why are we making this trade? I don't, but Murphy being on the West Coast, everybody didn't get to watch him. Oakland wasn't real good, for last season. But I think once he gets into Atlanta and gets in this, I think he's going to produce at the plate. And I think he's going to solidify their defense behind the plate, handle the pitching staff. I think once we get to watch him day in, day out, you're going to see how big of a deal that trade was in a lot of ways. So, it's weird for me to say the biggest move of the offseason is going to be their sleeper this year. But I mean, I think it really is. It's kind of gotten overshadowed with the return of Acuna to full health and Ozzie Albies coming back. And, I don't think enough people are talking about how big of a move that getting Sean Murphy and then signing him to an extension is going to be for this team.
Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Kris. Really appreciate it. Where can people follow you if they want to see just see your material and your content? Where can they follow you?
Well, you can find us at batterypower.com, and then I'm on Twitter at Kris_Willis, but it's Kris with a K, KRIS_Willis. And I appreciate you allowing me to come on here and talk a little baseball with you.
Yeah, yes, sir. I can say that I've low-key been a bit of a Braves fan because of those TBS days, and just that 2021 team was so much fun. But it's really cool hearing more in depth about what to expect out of them. So, thank you so much again for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll see y'all next time.